Right, good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, welcome back. I hope you lunched well. We've got a packed afternoon ahead of us with some great sessions and debates and a few brand new announcements too. And we're going to kick off with our first plenary session on nationally determined contributions, plans, policies and priorities. Now the NDCs, of course, are right at the heart of the Paris Climate Accords. Whether that Paris Agreement succeeds or fails depends a lot on whether we can make the NDCs work and whether we can make them stick. And that's the subject for our panel this afternoon. So I'd like to welcome on stage Mr. R. Rashmi, the Special Secretary at the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. Professor Hironori Hamanaka, Chair of the Board of Directors, the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of TERI. And our chair this afternoon, Dr. Prodipto Ghosh, Distinguished Fellow at TERI. And we're going to be joined a little bit later by Mr. Erik Brandsma, Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency. So that's your panel. Dr. Ghosh.
Okay. So, good afternoon and welcome back from your lunch. And I can see that some participants are extending their lunch, no doubt, on account of the sumptuous menu that has been provided. But I hope they do get back, and I hope that the ones who are already here don't fall asleep. So, we have a galaxy of speakers. We have to finish at 2:30. That's 55 minutes, and leaving half an hour for presentation, for audience participation. That means about 5 minutes per speaker. I hope that's okay, because if the operators of the sound system have been given clear instructions that 1 second beyond 5 minutes and the microphone will be switched off, and 1 minute beyond 5 minutes, some of our very muscular young men, sitting in the audience, whose part-time job is to be bouncers at various bars in the city, that they will physically evict the speaker from the podium. So with that, we come to the topic of this afternoon's, this first session of this afternoon: NDCs, plans, policies, and priorities. Well, so far we've had the INDCs. Now with ratification and the Paris Agreement coming into force, hopefully in 30 days, we will be converted into NDCs. And of course, NDCs, what has surprised a lot of people is by and large how ambitious they have been. And I think, to me it proves the truth of Aesop's fable of the sun and the wind, that as long as there was the threat of legally binding commitments for mitigation with possible threats of sanctions if countries do not comply, countries were very, very loath to come up with ambitious targets and goals. And of course, once the whole regime moved onto a less stressful basis, and there was a very strong element of voluntariness, that countries were encouraged to put their best foot forward. They did put their best foot forward, and each I think by and large the overall INDCs that have been submitted have been very encouraging, very ambitious, and certainly I can say that the Indian INDC, shortly to become the NDC, is also extremely ambitious. So now we are joined by our fifth speaker. Okay. So let me introduce our speakers. So our first speaker is Mr. Erik Brandsma. He is Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency. He has an MSc in Natural Resources Management from SFU Vancouver, Canada. His previous work experience includes Department of Strategic Planning, Ministry of Environment, Netherlands, advised in the Director's Office at the Environment Directorate, OECD, and Task Manager, Sustainable Consumption and Production at the UN Commission on sustainable development. Before joining the Swedish Energy Agency, Erik worked as Vice President Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at E.ON AG and Vattenfall AB, Stockholm, Sweden. So, Erik, you have the floor. You are the opening bat, and you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. Erik, you weren't here when Dr. Ghosh threatened all kinds of nasty things that would happen to us.
Then I'm in bad shape, also considering the fact that I came so late, and I apologize. I apologize sincerely for that. Having an hour's margin as a buffer is not enough, obviously, for a half-hour drive. So it was bad in traffic, and I apologize for that. Yes, Ajay, thank you. Thanks, TERI. Thank you for having the opportunity to talk to you, address you briefly in 5 minutes. We have a landmark Paris Agreement. Its significance is in its implementation, not in the signatures, we all know. Will be interesting to see what happens in 5 years when we can start the first sort of measuring point of how quickly we can start counting down towards the targets for 2050. But the Paris Agreement is only an element in what I would like to call a perfect storm that is happening in sort of my area of energy transition around the world. And we see a rapidly falling cost for renewable energy. We have an oil price that is very low, that we always said would stop the growth of renewables around the world. But it has actually, since last year, not done that. Growth of renewables is increasing in spite of the oil price, the low oil price. The local air pollution issue, security issues, the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, all elements that build up to this perfect storm that creates a whole new energy system around the world. Also in Sweden. We have recently adopted targets of we will be 100% renewable in our electricity system, in electricity generation in 2040. Now we have a pretty good starting point with our hydro, but we'll need to replace our nuclear fleet and work on the integration of renewables into that energy system. We will have soon ambitious targets for energy efficiency, transportation, and that all are steps on the way to the Paris Agreement goals. So what needs to happen here? I think one of the key things is that we stop looking at singular starting points from a production generation perspective. We need to look at this as a whole, because the whole is more than the sum of the parts. The system needs to work. We need to link it to the transport system. We also need to consider elements of distribution and transmission. I think these are the things that need to be in place for a system to work. I think that energy efficiency is a key element here. And then the big unknown, storage. How can we integrate the storage element into the energy system at a cost-effective price? And these developments go faster than we would have considered possible earlier. With that, I think we see a system that will develop more decentralized. I think we will, just as in Sweden, we will have a situation in India also where we have surplus capacity, which gives low prices, which then also makes it difficult to know who will invest in keeping the system up to date, but also expanding it into the next century. What will prosperity look like? Does this hamper or does this provide opportunities, these developments? And I'm convinced, and many with me, that these actually provide opportunities, new business opportunities, new actors in the market, new partnerships. This all, I think, in that changing landscape, those who move now will have an advantage, a competitive advantage. Something on transportation. This is the key challenge for Sweden. This is where our emissions are in terms of CO2. Here we are working hard on getting biofuels into the market. We will start regulating that through blending in measures and regulation, but there will be also an extremely hard push on electrification. In the future, we will see a large deal of electrification into the private automobiles deal, the person's traffic. The large trucks, of course, will rely on partly electrification, but also biofuels for a longer time to come. So with this, act now, I think it's important to realize that what we do now in terms of building power plants, buying cars, putting infrastructure on the road, infrastructure in place, this will be with us for a longer period of time, and this will actually determine our options between now and 2050, and therefore also determine whether we'll be able to achieve the Paris targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you for sticking to your assigned time. Our next speaker is Professor Hironori Hamanaka, who is no stranger to TERI and no stranger to the earlier versions of the earlier generation of the WSDS. So Professor Hamanaka is the chair of IGES Board of Directors. When he took up his current position at IGES, he was teaching at Cairo University as a professor and previously served as the Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, as well as the other important positions at the Ministry of Environment in Japan. And while serving with the government of Japan, he devoted his administrative career to intergovernmental negotiations in areas including the Kyoto Protocol and its implementing rules, major agreements in the field of sustainable development, such as the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation of 2002, the development of national policies to implement international agreements, most notably the Kyoto Protocol. And based on his professional career, he served as co-chair of the Compliance Committee under the Kyoto Protocol and the chair of its facilitative branch from 2006 to 2008. He has a BA in engineering from the University of Tokyo in 1967. So, Professor Hamanaka.
Thank you, Dr. Prodipto Ghosh, for your kind introduction, and thank you for this opportunity. I would like to discuss issues related to NDCs, long-term strategies, global stocktake transparency framework, and capacity building. On NDCs and long-term strategies, I believe integrating NDCs into national level planning is critical in mainstreaming climate actions into national development and economic policies. The Paris Agreement also provides further opportunities for policy integration, that is, development of long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies and linkage between NDCs and long-term strategies. By linking NDCs and long-term strategies, parties can, or countries can plan and implement cost-effective NDCs with concrete policies and tools from broad range and long-term perspectives. Countries should utilize the process of developing long-term strategies as a platform for all relevant stakeholders, including business, local government, science community, and the public, to discuss and share views on national development strategy. This will help developing the sense of ownership of such strategies, which is critical to carry out actions accordingly by stakeholders. On global stocktake, as you know, its objective is to take stock of the overall progress towards the purpose and long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. It is decided that the outcome of the stocktake shall inform policy parties or inform countries in updating and enhancing their actions and support, and in enhancing international cooperation. Key question here is how to raise ambitions of parties NDCs through the stocktake, and what kind of modalities and information are necessary to do so. I wouldn't go into details, but enhanced transparency framework will provide inputs to the global stocktake, and a short list of sources of inputs have been already agreed upon. With regard to modalities of the stocktake, ownership and political attention is important for enhancing ambition. To promote ownership on the outcome of the stocktake, it is important that the process is open, inclusive and open. The modalities of the stocktake should be structured so that a facilitative process is created where parties can learn and contribute to the process, and this will further drive the momentum toward climate action. The Paris Agreement established an enhanced transparency framework for action and support with built-in flexibility which takes into account parties' different capabilities. The purpose of the framework for transparency for mitigation action is to provide clear understanding of actions to track progress toward achieving parties' individual NDCs and to inform the global stocktake. The NDCs submitted to parties vary in terms of their base years, target years, types of mitigation target, and it is difficult to assess comparability of their actions and support. In order to ensure the comparability, parties need to develop a common framework to improve comparability of the implementation of NDCs. A key challenge here is how the framework can improve the comparability of NDCs while allowing a certain level of flexibility to accommodate diverse capacities of parties. To strike the balance between comparability and flexibility, it is worth considering a commitment type-based approach, which would build on measurement reporting verification system with different requirements for different types of commitments, bearing in mind that each type of commitment has its own challenges. I will not go into details here, but this approach would provide a number of benefits, and I can come back to this point if you are interested. Finally, capacity building is vital to support many developing countries to fully meet the requirement of the Paris Agreement, especially its transparency framework. COP21 decision established the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, or CBIT, to strengthen international cooperation for the implementation of the transparency framework by developing countries. Ajay is actively participating in the initiative, and I believe efforts in the following 5 key areas should be enhanced for the effective implementation of capacity building under the new umbrella of CBIT. And due to the time limitation, I just quickly list up 5 points. First, the assessment of existing capacity building approaches to improve the understanding of their effectiveness. Second, assessment of progress in capacity building effort, which is critical to understand the current state and change of capacities over time with respect to the implementation of transparency framework and NDC. Third, development of a national capacity building plan needs to be integrated into a national implementation plan for NDCs. Fourth, addressing a wider scope of requirements to cover not only mitigation but also adaptation and means of implementation. Last but not least, effective coordination among various capacity building actors is critical to share information on good practices, discuss strategies, and identify common challenges. Mr. Chair, these are points I wish to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hamanaka. And I now invite Dr. Ajay Mathur. I don't think there's any particular need to introduce him. You're all familiar with him. So, Ajay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. I have known Dr. Ghosh in many avatars, as a researcher in TERI, as the head of the Environment of Ministry who introduced me to the climate negotiations, as a professor in TERI University, and now as a stern taskmaster in this in this plenary. That leads me to the question of how do we ensure that the NDCs are met, even though Dr. Ghosh's bouncers may not be around, at least not around tangibly. If you look at the NDCs, almost all of them, I think every NDC with no exception, includes every country's determination to increase the amount of renewables it has. And most of them, with I think 16 exceptions or something, have fairly substantive goals on energy efficiency enhancement as well. These form the bulk of actions. There are, of course, other things. There are some enabling mechanisms. Professor, I think it was Erik who talked about storage, smart grids, and so on. How do we make these happen? Every country, as it goes ahead, will need to address first, where is it that these are needed? Second, who will do it? What is the business model within which it will occur? And third, what do I need in order to get it done? What is the soft capacity? What are the policies that are needed for this to happen? Professor Hamanaka talked about the importance of transparency. I think it helps if everybody knows what is happening and there are processes for feedback. All of this leads me to the point, and I will expand on what Professor Hamanaka talked about, was capacity building. Each one of us knows the challenges of introducing a new set of goals for a country, for a government to achieve. You need to carry a lot of stakeholders with you. You typically don't have enough data in order to make decisions. As you go ahead, technologies change, prices change, industry comes to you and say that they're making a loss, and therefore robust decisions need to be made. The point is that there are no correct answers to any of these issues. I think it is important to provide some kind of a peer-to-peer support network for these kinds of actions. If Erik has been successful in putting a smart grid network in Sweden, I would like to see how he can support others through his experience by asking the right questions that will accelerate the way in which others can implement it. That's one part. The second part is, in a world of changing technologies and prices, how do I structure a process that can capture benefits as they go along? There is no doubt that the prices of renewables will continue to fall. There's no doubt that the price of energy efficient technologies will continue to fall. Consequently, if I capture a huge amount of the benefits today, and tomorrow the prices are lower, have I lost something? On the other hand, I've also gained, because the kinds of not just carbon but other benefits which have occurred by my early implementation are also now in my pocket. How do I balance these two? Again, I don't think there is one right answer that can take care of all eventualities. But different people, different agencies will need to find the answers to this. Short point, NDCs present a unique case that we are trying to accelerate action and do it in a time frame that is relatively limited. It can always be done if the time was not limited. Has been done in the past when time is not limited. Consequently, the way we handle these changes of identifying, putting in robust technologies, robust policies, getting feedback and changing them, one set of actions. Ensuring that we are able to capture technologies and ensure that those prices decrease over time, second challenge is. And the third, getting the business models right, that's the third challenge. I think these are the three key areas in which each one of us, each country, each agency, each business house will have to find its answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajay. I think all our speakers have been very disciplined so far, and our and our final speaker for this session is Mr. R. Rashmi. He's a senior member of the IAS, and he is currently Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. Now, those of you who are cognizant with the Indian governmental system know that Special Secretaries have a very short longevity, and they quickly become secretaries, and hopefully they remain in the same ministry, or then they move on to another ministry, or they move out and retire. And I do hope that we are going to see Mr. Rashmi being elevated very soon, so that he has his own ministry to run, hopefully the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And of course, in his present role, he is responsible for climate change negotiations as well as all the other aspects of international cooperation. And Mr. Rashmi had an earlier spell in the Ministry of Environment and Forests, where he was the linchpin of the Indian climate change negotiating team from 2008 to 2013. These were perilous years for the climate change negotiations, from just before Copenhagen till Durban. And of course, he did a magnificent job, as indeed did the entire Indian negotiating team. And then he has also had, he's an experienced trade negotiator. He's had 2 stints in the Ministry of Environment and Forests. He was also Chief Secretary of the state of Manipur in Northeast India. And on account of his work there over many years, he was awarded the Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Public Administration. And we received the news of his award when we were in Bonn in 2008 for the negotiations. And I remember that the celebrations that we had over some excellent Hefeweizen beer at that point in time. So Rashmi, he's a graduate in economics from Patna University and holds an MBA from the Free University of Brussels. So Rashmi, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your kind words, and I'll try to be as disciplined as other speakers. The question of NDCs, which comes after Paris, I will try to deal with this subject in 2 parts. The way we are going to achieve the NDCs domestically, and how we are going to treat them in the global context in course of the international negotiations. As far as the state of our economy is concerned, these NDCs are quite ambitious. There are 2 fundamental characteristics which I would like to mention, that these NDCs are ambitious for us and also very flexible. In fact, flexibility is the hallmark of the Paris Agreement, if you all notice this. It allows the flexibility, while being as ambitious as possible, to all countries to express their possible contributions in the most flexible manner. And this is the key success of the Paris Agreement. Before this, we had and we still have the Cancun pledges, which we are still implementing, and we will continue to implement this till 2020. We are moving positively in that direction. We have a goal of reducing the emissions intensity by 20 to 25% by 2020, and we have made substantial progress in that direction. Now, the NDCs which we have offered under the Paris Agreement and which have now become absolute after the ratification by India are basically an updation and enhancement of the ambition which we had expressed in Cancun pledges. Now, question is, how do we achieve this NDC in the next 15 years? Because These NDCs have been expressed in a time frame of 2030. So we are in 2016 today, we have another 14 years, 4 years of which will expire in course of implementing the Cancun pledges, and we will have 10 years time left for implementing the NDCs. How do we do that? Now the question, which a critical question, if you are familiar with the planning process in the Government of India, we used to have 5 years plans. Now we have Niti Aayog, which is tasked with the responsibility of ingraining these goals in the planning process. Now we don't have a plan for 2030 at the moment with the Government of India. We are in the process of evolving one. So while we have the targets and the goals with us, we don't really have a plan of action at the macro level in the government. We have to evolve, we are evolving that vision. And additional challenge is that we have sustainable developmental goals, which are also in the time frame of 2030. And they kick in earlier, they kick in from 2015. So challenge is to integrate all these three, create a plan of action, 3 years, 7 years, 10 years time plan of action, and request the ministries to internalize these goals in their budgets, in their plan of action, and in their programs. We are talking to all of them, and hopefully we will do this in the next 1 or 2 years. But the other question is that of financing. Where do we find the means? The other speakers have talked about technology, capacity building, but there is a key element which is that of financing. It is an additional challenge. There will be an increased cost to the economy. We have to find means and resources for doing this. For implementing the current Cancun pledges, we are trying a slew of methods. We have a National Action Plan on Climate Change where there are 8 missions. There are a number of schemes and programs which are being implemented by the ministries with their budgets. In some cases we have gone to the market, we have levied a cess on coal, which gives us an annual yield of 3,000 crores of rupees. We have some experimental market oriented schemes in the energy efficiency sector, for example, the Performance, Achieve and Trade scheme. We have guarantee funds. So we have things of that which are being tried, but it will be, we will have to upscale that, and we are in the process of doing that. So that is the second challenge which we have to meet domestically, and in course of doing that, maybe we will have to come up with new instruments which the various ministries will have to apply. And who knows, maybe the regulations may have to change. I am not in a position to give you any specific indication of the kind of regulatory changes that might take place, but that is something which the ministries are grappling with. But one thing which I would like to underscore is that the NDCs are flexible, and they give ample flexibility to the ministries to evolve the kind of measures. They need not resort to legal measures. They can simply go and adopt a programmatic approach, and perhaps they will be in a position to meet these goals given the track record which we have shown in the implementation of Cancun pledges. I will come to the second part, and I will just take 1 more minute. The two things which are happening after Paris in the run up to 2020, one is that there is an emphasis on the subnational entities coming into play and helping the governments and the countries meet their goals. Now this is a concept which we will have to perhaps explore, whether they will enhance it or whether they will detract from it. We are still not clear, but I am sure the experts will be able to help us in this. The second thing is that facilitative processes and the instruments which are available to the international community to help the countries achieve these targets. Mr. Hamanaka talked about some of them. Those are still being discussed. There is still no finality about that. For example, the market instruments. What kind of market do we want? Carbon market. We have the experience of CDM. We don't have a clarity about what kind of market we want to see in the future, which makes everybody comfortable. At the same time, there are different groups of stakeholders coming together to form coalitions and helping the countries and the community. These are all welcome, but the only caution is that we need to ensure that they do not detract from the process. They do not become an additional burden on the countries. I'll just cite two examples. We have negotiations going on under the Montreal Protocol for managing the HFCs. We also have parallel negotiations going on in ICAO for managing the civil aviation emissions in the international sector. All of them basically are essentially talking about caps, sectoral caps, and requesting the countries to phase them down. Now these are, whether they will be additional to the NDCs, whether they will be part of the NDCs, whether they will detract from the NDCs is an open question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rashmi, and thank you to all the other speakers. So we've had, if I can characterize the way that the speakers have gone about their task, they have done part of a SWOT analysis. They've analyzed the strengths, in particular the ambition of the INDCs. They have looked at the weaknesses, in particular capacity, means of implementation, and so on. They've looked at opportunities, for example, the falling prices of renewables, and so on. But I don't think that they have quite addressed the T. And of course, the biggest T word in town today is the elections in a major country happening in November. So could I ask our speakers to give us their thoughts on how they think the US election should play out?
How they should play out.
Well, I'm not giving you an easy job, right?
Or whether what will their impact will be on the climate.
Well, whatever. Whatever.
Raghush, the New York Times runs every day a graph on the possibility of a win for the two candidates. And for the last, since August, the possibility of a win for Hillary Clinton has been on an average 80%. It's average, so it goes down to 75, it's gone up to 85. But let me come to the more important question. Supposing, as Mr. Trump has said, if he gets elected, he's going to pull the US out of the Kyoto Protocol. Supposing he does. Now, in a month's time, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement would have come into force. With the Paris Agreement coming into force, the process of withdrawing from it is a relatively lengthy process, and it takes 3 + 1, 4 years, which is the length of a presidential cycle in the US. Okay? The second thing is, as president, he instructs the agencies not to push on the various executive programs that President Obama has started on addressing climate change. Here I see another thing happening. In the US, as in most countries of the world, the percentage of people who believe that action is needed to address climate change is increasing. That, I believe, is also reflected in the way politicians, whether it is President Obama or Prime Minister Modi, respond to it. They see these as issues that the public wants to be addressed. Even Mr. Trump, even if he doesn't believe in climate change, cannot ignore it. He has to say, I will do something about it, which is I'll get out of it. In my view, the number of people, even in the United States, who would seek to address climate change will increase in the future. It is going to be very difficult for a future president to disengage the US from the process.
Okay, that's a very hopeful sign. Any of the others would like to take a slash at this?
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah, good. I agree. I'd also like to add that no matter what happens in the election in November, I also think that is what we see as a growing leadership on these types of issues that are shifting towards the East. It is not a coincidence that Prime Minister Modi has signed the agreement. I think earlier on maybe it was driven very much to the climate negotiations under the Kyoto times from both Japan and from European Union. But I think there's a clear sign that here the power is shifting. And if we would have the case, which I have hard to believe still, that Mr. Trump would win, then that would be very unfortunate, because this is a country that has an enormous footprint. But on the other hand, I think there will be the discussion is ongoing, the consensus about climate change is there. I think also that if you're an international business operating globally and want to work on your your supply chain, your products, your customers, you need to consider these issues in sustainability to 100%. Otherwise, you will lose your customers and you would lose your production base. So I think there's what I would like to say is there is a development that is difficult to stop by Mr. Trump.
Rashmi, Ms. Hamanaka, would you like to take a stab at this?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I don't have much to add what has been said already. Although I acknowledge that if Mr. Trump would be elected, there are some impacts regarding particularly the federal policies, US policies, and the budget issues. And so UNFCCC might suffer from the reduction in US contribution to the convention, but otherwise, I don't think much impact will be come from the outcome of the election. In view, particularly of the upsurge of actions taken by so many countries, so many businesses, so many subnational governments, and I don't think this momentum would be stopped simply by the fact that new US president would not be support the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Professor Hamanaka. I think I will exempt Mr. Rashmi from attempting to answer this question, because I note there are some hawk-eyed media persons here, and then they would report in the newspapers tomorrow that senior Indian official hopes that Trump will lose. So we do not want that kind of outcome. Okay?
Well, we don't know what he hopes.
Well, whatever. Let him keep his counsel on this one. So the floor is now open from the participants. Please raise your hand, introduce yourself, your name and your affiliation, and address your question. It has to be a question, not a comment, to one or the other of the speakers. Please, you have the floor. Yeah.
We need a mic.
We need a microphone. Just keep your hand raised so that they can figure out.
Hello. Here, sir.
There. Just keep your hand raised so that the guy can spot you.
Sir, I'm here.
No, I'm talking to this gentleman there. I'm talking to this gentleman there. Your turn will come later. Yeah, please give him a microphone. He's got his hand raised. Please raise your hand. Not there. Here.
Yeah, I wanted to know something
Yeah,
about...
you need to introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Yeah, my name is Kamal. I am from media.
Yeah,
And I wanted to know something about ICT and how ICT can definitely accelerate SDGs. So, I mean, what are the kinds of ICT initiatives you have in mind? You know, information communication technology, new media, how, especially in education and health, you know, this ICT can play a big role.
Yeah, okay, we get your question. I mean, the question is that what's the role of ICT? You mentioned about SDGs. Strictly, this session is about NDCs, but nevertheless, I think, you know, we can overlook that. So, would the speakers like to respond to this?
I think in terms of making it possible to achieve your NDCs, ICT is a key element, no doubt. I think with the changing systems that we have, the transformation that the energy system goes through, ICT is the enabler. This creates both the business opportunities, but also just plain energy efficiency. I mean, we be able to run our networks much more efficient. We manage logistic flows, for example, in transportation through ICT and algorithms. These are just a few of the examples that I think illustrate the key role, and there's so many more. I was today at a smart grid. Tata Power has a first smart grid installed here in Delhi with help of some technology, and it's really impressive what ICT can do. This is a fully automated system that automatically shifts the loads, can provide the storage, that automatically also identifies errors somewhere, shifts us around, etc., etc. So many possibilities and great business opportunities.
Right. So who'd like to go next? But there's this lady out. Yeah, this gentleman there. Yeah, please stand up so that you can get a mic. Yeah, you have a microphone already. Please introduce yourself.
Myself, Ravindra More from Mahindra and Mahindra Automotive and Farm Sector.
Yeah.
My question to Mr. Erik, just I like to know how are you going to maintain or achieve 100% renewable energy for solar and wind in the period where monsoon occurs. That time you know that everything is down. So how are you going to maintain that time?
I don't think there's a monsoon in Sweden, but nevertheless, Erik can take a try at that.
I was wondering the same thing, but no, the system that will, I mean, we will have our challenges undoubtedly, but we are blessed with a significant amount of hydropower that will not only provide us the electricity, but also provide us with regulatory, not regulation in terms of laws, but regulating the flows of the base power, the base load basically. Then we will have a large amount of intermittent energy that comes into the system, electricity that comes into the system, by wind, by solar, to some degree in Sweden, mostly in the summertime. In the winter, it basically is no sun, but we have double the amount of sun in the summertime. And bioenergy. We will need, as a stable resource, also the bioenergy. And as I said, if you combine that potential with storage options, which I believe will be there in 2040, both at the homes, but also in a large scale at the net, with increased energy efficiency, then I think the system will work.
Thank you. Okay, there's a lady here, please. Okay, go ahead.
I am Tripta Thakur from National Institute of Technology, Bhopal. I have a question from Mr. Rashmi. It's very important to have a good legislation in the water sector, but there is no regulator in the water sector in India. What are the future possibilities when we will have regulators in electricity, like electricity sector we have regulator, when we will have regulator in the water sector?
Well, there is a water mission which we are implementing for achieving a climate goal. I am not in a position to give a specific answer on behalf of the Ministry of Water Resources. In fact, there are other colleagues who are in the room here. But this is something which is a regulatory measure, will depend on consultation with various stakeholders. And this is something which the ministry would be considering.
Yeah. Fortunately, we have with us Dr. Sarkar, who is a former Secretary, Ministry of Water Resources, and he will be happy to enlighten us on this subject.
You see, the National Water Policy 2012 talks about positioning regulator in all states, because water is a state subject, so the regulator are to be positioned in the state. Maharashtra is the only state where there is a regulator. But there are many issues about the functioning of the regulatory system, and there are planning commission is seized of the matter, and they are trying to find a new kind of institutional framework on the subject.
Though the state of Karnataka would probably argue that the Supreme Court is the ultimate regulator for water resources. This lady here, please. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So I would like to know how these...
Introduce yourself.
I am Sabina. I'm a teacher and a researcher from Goa on energy. I have a question to how are the plans going to be implemented? Here in Goa, we made a good regional plan taking into account the, protecting the eco-sensitive zones. The plan was notified. But when the government came into power for the last 4.5 years, the plan has been kept on hold. Instead, all activity is being done outside the plan. We have the investment promotion board which has been formed, and they are giving permission to red industries in eco-sensitive zone. They have gone and passed a law where the coconut tree has been declassified. So you can cut coconut trees, so there's massive cutting of coconut trees that are taking place. So how do you resolve this contradiction?
Well, your question actually is about the regional plan for Goa. And of course, it's a regional plan for Goa which has to be implemented by the Goa administration. It doesn't quite, relate to the NDCs that we are talking about here. But let me actually, suggest that maybe you might file a writ in the Supreme Court to override the political authorities in Goa and implement the original regional plan. Does that encourage you?
No, I thought that what we are planning at the international level, then it translates to the national level, and then it should translate to the local level.
Yeah, the regional plan, the Goa regional plan actually does not quite relate to the Paris Agreement. Okay? Yeah. Yes, please. There I see 2 hands at the back. So, go ahead.
Thank you. Kieran Stacey from the Financial Times. There are, I think, at the moment around 65 gigawatts worth of new coal power that has already been approved and many more in the planning approval process. Do you think that that actually puts in threat India's ability to meet its NDC targets?
Well, Mr. Rashmi?
No, I don't think this comes in the way of implementing or achieving the goals. As I was trying to explain, the NDCs afford sectoral flexibility to the countries, which they can exercise, and coal is just one of the sectors. Coal-fired power plants. There is already a program with the government of improving the capacity utilization and the efficiency of these plants. So for a long time to come, the coal will continue to be a major power source of power generation. But that doesn't come in the way of implementing the NDCs, because the NDCs are a mix of several ambitions from different sectors. So we are absolutely sure that this doesn't detract from our ambition.
Okay. If I can give some numbers. We have about 200, less than 200 gigawatts of coal-based power stations. As you said, 65 are at various stages of construction, approval, and so on. There will be some more which will be built. However, the power plants that exist today are used for a very short fraction of the time, something like less than 60%. What that means is that as we go along, we will probably reach something of the order of 300 or 325 gigawatts of coal power. On the other hand, we would have touched 175 gigawatts of wind, solar, and other renewables by 2022. And if balancing technologies, whether it is battery storage or other forms, are cost effective, we would probably see something of the order of 300 gigawatts of renewables also be there in the grid. Now, the NDC says that that at least 40% of our generating capacity mix in 2030 would be non-fossil. That, I think, we will be able to meet.
And this would have to be the final comment or question, not comment, final question. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm the Dhruv Gupta from Sea Balance Solutions. My question is for Professor Hamanaka. As of right now, the NDCs are going to result in a global warming of 2.7 degrees Celsius, as per UNEP and Climate Tracker. So I was just wondering if your institute is planning to do something to encourage countries to perhaps do more to reach 2 degrees.
Thank you for your question. And certainly our institute is very much interested in working with our partners to enhance, to accelerate or facilitate countries or parties to ratchet up their ambition. Otherwise, as you have just said, the collection of current NDCs would not ensure that the global, the world as a whole would not be able to achieve the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement provides 3 mechanisms through which the countries and parties can enhance, are expected to enhance their ambitions. The first is the global stocktake. The second is the transparency mechanism. And third is NDCs as well as long-term strategies. And 3 are closely interlinked. And I wouldn't go into details, but there are a number of issues that we need to find out effective mechanisms, design of effective mechanisms, and their implementation. And I do hope that already we have a good prospect to believe that the Paris Agreement would come into effect quite soon. And this will put more pressure on negotiators to working out as soon as possible the necessary and appropriate implementing rules of the Paris Agreement that would ensure the effective operationalization of the ratchet-up mechanism under the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Professor Hamanaka. Now, before we wrap up the session, let me give 1 minute to each of our panelists to give their final statements. So, Erik?
Final statement, always a big pressure on let me lick on the question that was asked. I think one of the key elements in the Paris Agreement is that we have these 5-year reporting and follow-ups. That is the only way to track progress and make sure that we keep the pressure on. So I'm very pleased about that aspect in the agreement, and I think it will be very interesting to see how the picture looked like in 2020. For me, that is the first crystallization point of testing whether the Paris Agreement is actually delivering on its promises. I would also like to add that as I said, with this perfect storm of things happening, there is such a clear picture developing that business and sustainable development can go hand in hand. That there is prosperity in changing course, and that there is possibilities of developing a society, creating jobs, and then also delivering on the Paris Agreement at the same time, as well as the midway stop to 2030 with the Sustainable Development Targets.
Right. Ajay?
I'll just follow up on what Erik said and reinforce that point. In the 2 days, and today is the 3rd day that we've been here, particularly the first day, which was the business day, it was very clear that the views, the perspective of business has changed. We are looking at opportunities. Today, you saw, for example, the first Indian company to announce an internal carbon price. I think we are changing in the way that we address this issue. This is the larger swing in public opinion, business opinion, and political opinion that I was talking about earlier. And the last issue is, I think the transparency part of the Paris Agreement is fundamental to the long-term success, because as we know more and more about what is happening, the more we will start seeing what we can do ourselves and where do we hold people to task for not moving along the lines that we as a country have promised. So, Rashmi?
Well, I share the optimism of the other two speakers as well. The NDCs are not only a challenge, but also they do present an opportunity to our country. The business, actually sometimes business surprises us at their ability to cope with the new challenges, and this is a perfect case. The NDCs, the kind of targets which we have taken upon ourselves for in the 2030 time frame, this 10 to 15 years time, I am sure the business will find the right mix of measures to cope with this new demand. And the challenge actually will be to keep it the least cost transition, and the governments will have to support the business in this, and I am sure there is a willingness on both sides which was certainly absent internationally across the countries, at least before the Paris Agreement. And this Paris Agreement does give that message that the business and the governments are partners and they have to work together.
Yes, I was personally involved. I myself was involved in the Kyoto Protocol negotiations 19 years ago, and at that time the key players was governments, particularly the developed country governments. But now the situation has completely changed. There are many key players now emerging, and the governments all over the world, and many business leaders, subnational government leaders, mayors, and governors, they are acting decisively. And this has changed a lot. And I think that since we have a good reason to believe that the Paris Agreement would come into effect quite soon, so this will add further momentum. So in this respect, I think since not only the national government, but also many subnational governments, business leaders, and many other people are now taking steps to make things further forward. So in that sense, I fully agree with the point made by Dr. Ajay Mathur on the importance of peer-to-peer learning networks.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peer-to-peer learning, I think that's a very hopeful note on which to end this session. So let me conclude by thanking all our panelists for their extremely cogent and insightful presentations, and to the participants for asking some very thought-provoking questions to the participants. So thank you very much indeed. And Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much. You have your brief photograph.